Awesome, we're live.
Hello.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to DevSecCon Global. For those of you who don't know who we are, we're an inclusive community that educates and enables developers in application security. I'm Sam Hepburn, and I work behind the scenes to make this community happen, and I'm joined by Simon Maple. Simon, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Simon Maple. Been a member of the community for many years now, also working at Sneak.
Amazing. So Simon's actually also going to be my right-hand man in getting questions across to Adam. But before we kick off, just a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you who aren't on our Slack community just yet, please head on over to devsecon.com and join Slack. There's a button there. That's actually where we're going to drive engagement today. You can ask questions to Adam. We can get them across and obviously meet our other community members. So please head on over there if you'd like to ask any questions. It's also a great place to find out any of our upcoming events or just chat generally about DevSecOps. If you enjoyed today's session or you want to see any other sessions in the community, this community is definitely for you. So please pick us on Twitter or Slack or email or smoke signals or whatever you can find, and let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see more of, and we'll try and make it happen. But yeah, that's enough from me. Simon, anything else?
No, I'm really looking forward to this session. So happy to introduce the session and speaker. If you want me to go ahead.
Amazing. Yes, please. Let's bring Adam to stage.
Awesome.
I will do that. There we go.
There we go. Hello, Adam. Welcome.
Hey, good to see you folks.
Welcome. Whereabouts are you calling in today from?
I'm in Seattle.
Oh, lovely. Nice.
And today I can almost say sunny Seattle, but only almost.
Is spring coming over to Seattle as well as the UK? Two of the rainy places in the world, but
indeed, and the sun is trying so hard to peek through the clouds, but it's not quite making it yet.
Yeah, I mean I think heat seems to be a lot slower than light right now because this weekend it looked beautiful and sunny, but it was still pretty cold. So looking forward to some heat coming through in the next few weeks, hopefully. But welcome to DevSecCon, Adam. So for those of you who don't know Adam, I'm sure there are people somewhere who don't know Adam. Adam is one of the leading experts in threat modeling. He's got the t-shirt. He's even written the book on it as well. Threat modeling, designing for security. There we go. Look, is it that one there on the right hand side? So yeah, really looking forward to hearing from Adam about his views on threat modeling in 2021. So this is going to be a very interactive session. So you can absolutely join in on the live session channel. And yeah, Adam is like I say, a leading expert in threat modeling, does a lot of consultancy, technology, author, game designer as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And yeah, absolutely member of the Black Hat review board as well. So this is going to be a very good session from an expert that we have here today. Without further ado, Adam, I'll pass over to you. And for everyone, I really do encourage you to talk, discuss, and ask questions in the live session chat. And I'll be very, very rude and interrupt Adam as and when I feel it's a good time to do so. So, Adam, over to you.
Great, thank you. So, welcome. This is Threat Modeling in 2021, and got my mouse over there. You were asking about game design. I love games. People get enthusiastic when we play games. And so back while I was at Microsoft, I created Elevation of Privilege. Let's get this in camera a little bit. It's a card game that gives you hints to help you threat model. So each card has a little hint on it. You can't really read that because autofocus on cameras, you'd think it's a thing. But it says an attacker can manipulate data because there's no integrity protection. So this is the card, the 8 of Tampering. And the idea is to draw people in to threat modeling, to make it easy and accessible and fun. Because when we as AppSec experts or AppSec professionals engage in threat modeling, it's something we do, we enjoy, we get enthused about, and the game is designed to help you bring that to the teams that you're supporting, the teams that you're engaged with. And it's Creative Commons licensed. We'll get you some links after the talk here today via the Slack. So people come to me, I wrote a book on threat modeling, and they say, what's changing in threat modeling? This question I get all the time. And so this is the core that I want to talk about today. And by the way, I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes and leave plenty of time for live questions at the end. And also, our lovely hosts are going to be picking up interesting questions and feeding them to me as we go, if they're exactly on point to what I'm saying or to clarify what I'm saying. So, people come to me and they say, what's changing in threat modeling? And my response is that threat modeling is a way of thinking about the world. It's a way of thinking about what's going on. And so when people say, what's changing in threat modeling? I say, what's changing in the world? And, to state the obvious, and this graph is a little bit out of date, but the big thing that is happening in the world is obviously a global pandemic. And so that's an important set of changes, but there's other changes that are going on. There have been cyber sanctions against a number of nations. The previous president of the United States declared war on TikTok. There have been sets of vulnerabilities in the supply chain, things like Ripple 20 and SolarWinds. There's a thing which is weird to me. I've been in security and privacy for over 20 years. And when I'm in a cynical mood, I will tell you that in the fight between privacy and anything else, privacy is always the thing that we trade away. Until the pandemic, where people have said, no, I don't want to install these contact tracing apps. And I think it's a fascinating demonstration that people really do care about privacy when they're offered the opportunity to make a choice. They are literally choosing to increase risk to themselves by not having contact tracing information, as well as increasing risk to others around them when they're asked about that particular privacy versus health trade-off. And I think it's a fascinating light into the fact that people really do care about privacy. Talk about the FDA a little bit later. There's disinformation and misinformation. We're going to talk about that. And there have been criminal charges filed for someone covering up a breach. And so there's lots of change happening in the world, and we're going to talk about how to think about it as you're securing the products, the services, that you deliver. I want to start off by talking a little bit about the pandemic and what it means, because it is so big, it is so overwhelming that it's easy to lose track of how much change has happened in the last year. Everyone is scared, stressed, and sick. And this includes your customers, it includes your prospects, it includes your employees. There's enormous grief, there's enormous stress happening in the world. People say, oh, we're working from home, we're working remotely. And I like to think that we are in fact sheltering in place during a global catastrophe and getting work done as we can. I find that to be a healthier perspective. And one effect of this is that as people are working remotely, teams are distributed, and all of the implicit communication that was happening in development teams, in product teams, is shifting. And so that means that We need more communication tools. We need frameworks for talking about what we're building and the security of it. And security features were becoming more important before COVID. And with the pandemic, they're becoming even more important in ways that I think threat modeling helps us to address. And so when I talk about threat modeling, I like to talk about these 4 questions as being the North Stars, the key things that we think about. And the questions are, what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? And these questions define and scope the activities and the goals that we have in threat modeling. And in the threat modeling manifesto, we lead off with this 4-question framework as a way to think about how to threat model. And this has been around for a while now. And so the first thing I want to say about threat modeling in 2021 specifically is that these questions are holding up well. And so what I want to talk about is really focused on the first 2 questions. What are we working on and how are we working on it? And I'm going to talk about the fast-moving world of cyber a little bit. I'm going to talk about Agile. I'm going to skip over the models are scary bit so we can talk about Agile. And I'm going to talk about Stride. I'm going to talk about conflict modeling because I think those are interesting topics for today. And in the deck that will be available to you afterwards, there is some additional content that happy to take questions on it in the Slack channel afterwards. Let me start out with the fast-moving world of cyber. This is something people say all the time. And yeah, the world does change quickly. New stuff is happening all the time. And one of the things that I really like about using models to understand the world is that models help us make sense of all of these changes. If what you're looking at is every single CVE, there's a lot of change. There's a new CVE every hour, probably every minute some days. But you know, a lot of those are still very similar to what we saw in the Morris worm in 1988. We see stack smashing. More of it in the IoT world than on up-to-date versions of Linux or Windows or Mac OS, but it's still out there. The Morris worm took advantage of common passwords, which will always be with us. And it took advantage of misconfigured daemons. And misconfigured daemons are a lot less common. People are much more cognizant today than they were in 1988, 1995. About demons just sitting there listening to the internet. And so things do change, but they don't change all that quickly. Now, one thing that is changing is the world of IoT. There are way more sensors and actuators now than there were last year, and compared to 10 years ago, it is night and day. And an awful lot of these things literally are running low-end processors with Linux configured the way it was in 1999. And if you're a pen tester, this is awesome. And if you're a defender, it's not so awesome. The cost is all over the place. The impact is all over the place. And there are new attackers who will talk about as a result of the fact that our computers, the computers that are sold, no longer look like computers with monitors and keyboards and mice. They look like everything around us. They look like light bulbs. My microphone has a USB connector in it now rather than a TRS. Everything is computerized and attackable. So that's a change. The ways to threat model are evolving and responding. We don't have to throw them out. We don't have to invent new things. We've got building blocks like tools, Microsoft threat modeling tools. Tutomantic is a company that's making some really interesting threat model components, various risk-built enterprise tooling. We have approaches. We've been using Stride. I'll talk a lot about Stride in this talk, but we've been using Stride for 20 years. We're also seeing a lot of success with kill chains, especially but not limited to MITRE's attack. The deliverables are changing. When I started threat modeling, we wrote a lot of threat model reports. Now our threat modeling tools file bugs for us to integrate into development activity in more aligned ways. And the 4 questions, this framework of building blocks of what are we working on, what can go wrong, what are we going to do about it, did we do a good job, helps us think about these changes. Rather than saying threat modeling is revolutionized, I have to learn a whole new way of doing it, I can pick up individual pieces and say, wow, the way we were asking, did we do a good job? That needs to evolve. We need to do more retrospectives, or we're going to pick up, for example, Etsy's blameless post-mortem document and really apply it to threat modeling. You don't have to reinvent threat modeling to get better at answering one particular question. So one of the things that is changing is how much Agile is in the world. And in this community, I think that statement is causing a bunch of people to scratch their chins and say, really? Is changing? The world is Agile. Friday on LinkedIn, I got an email from someone saying, I'm working in a bank. We're going through an Agile transformation. Can you help us out? Yes, I can. And so, while a lot of places are deep into the Agile world, the reason I really want to talk about this is because threat modeling, frankly, has something of a waterfall reputation. And I think that's unfortunate. I don't think threat modeling is inherently Agile or inherently waterfall any more than a programming language is. The ways in which we use it can be very, very different. And so when I think about this, the skills, the tasks that you do, the frameworks that we apply threat modeling are very, very similar. But the deliverables and scoping are vastly different. And so when I ask the first question in threat modeling, what are we working on? I worked at Microsoft. I've threat modeled across all of Windows. Windows is one answer. Another answer is I'm working on this individual feature, which I plan to ship on Thursday. Both of those are legitimate scopes to threat model in. And the way in which we think about, okay, I'm adding a single little thing versus I'm adding 3 years of development by thousands of people is very different, but the skills and the tasks actually relate very closely. And so in waterfall, so first down the leftmost column are the 4 questions. What are we working on? Our system model. What can go wrong? We find threats. What are we going to do about it? We fix it. Did we do a good job? The middle column is waterfall, where we have this big scope. And you might think of this. You might think of this as the way in which we threat model is big scope, system diagrams. We have controls and mitigations and test cases. And when we go to Agile, we move from documents to having bugs and conversations with really tiny scope. The big picture is treated as security debt, just like other forms of technical debt. And the ways we find threat are similar. We use Stride, we use kill chains, we use brainstorming, but we only aim it at the in-sprint code. Sometimes we use spikes to understand some effort that doesn't lead to a development deliverable. We use security-focused stories. We have acceptance criteria. Threat modeling works in Agile environments, and it works super well as communication tools to keep teams aligned and getting explicit as they are more and more distributed. So if you are starting to threat model, work the features being built. You'll see a lot of advice out there on the internet that says you need to start with a big model of the whole system. It's not agile. You're creating friction against the development team, against the product unit, whatever it is, rather than working the way they work. If you develop some skills, you demonstrate value, later on you'll get to worry about that debt. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over this, but I'm going to talk about ways in which different system models exist. And so this diagram shows the start of a feature over on the left and the more and more developed versions of it on the right. And so our words, the words we use to talk about a feature as it's being developed in a CI/CD pipeline, tend to be Slack, it tends to be email, it tends to be super informal. We have dialogue about what we might build and how it might work. Then we get into a discussion and a decision about how it's going to be, and we write some specs. If what we're building is an API that's exposed to the rest of the world, it might go through some review phases because people are going to take dependencies on it. We develop a plan of record. And similarly, our pictures evolve in this world as features become more and more set. They go from whiteboard to Visio or Draw.io or what have you. And sometimes they even get photoshopped up. So they're nice, pretty pictures that people can look at and see that this is the plan of record. And so each of these is a way to answer the question, what are we working on? And each of them is appropriate to a different degree of formality in the thing you're developing and operating. So these different goals have different deliverables. And there's a problem that happens. People say, bring me a diagram. Security people say, bring me a diagram, we'll do a threat model together. Excuse me. If you want to have an open dialogue, don't ask people to bring a diagram. The diagram is the last thing they deliver. It's the thing because they don't want to redo the work. So they wait until all the decisions have been made, and then they draw a diagram that they hope is good enough for the security team. And then this meeting happens. And in the meeting, the product people, the ops people, walk in having made all the decisions. And the security people want to think that all the decisions are open to dialogue, open to a back and forth. And so the meeting devolves. Maybe you've been in a meeting like this where it started out all friendly, and within like 2 minutes, people are at each other's throats. One of the primary things that leads to that talking past one another, that anger, is the phrase, bring me a diagram. And so if you are having these high conflict meetings with the folks around you, I want to encourage you to ask yourself, where do we think we are? Where does the security team think we are in terms of dialogue versus discussion versus review? And where does the product team think we are? And oftentimes you will see that there is a massive disconnect there. And so if you want to solve that, you can either have your security team go to early conversations, early dialogue meetings with a whiteboard marker in hand, or you can accept that you're at a review stage and only make changes, only drive for changes that are really worth breaking the build and rebuilding. So, a little bit of Monty Python for you. Who approacheth the bridge of product release must answer these questions 3. What is your name? What is your quest? And where is your threat model? You get conflict as a result of this. It's predictable, it's avoidable. And the avoidability is the thing that I want to encourage you if you're in this problem space. That didn't come out quite right. Another question people bring me a lot is, how do I threat model cloud and serverless? the cloud provider is taking over more and more of the blue, and what remains is your business logic. Threat model the stuff that you are working on. That might be infrastructure as code sometimes, and often it's business logic. It's what is the unique thing that we are building that is going to be threatened. And don't forget, to threat model your build and deploy pipelines, and I want to mention that I've had a slide like this for a couple of years, way predating SolarWinds, who, along with many of us, would have benefited had they threat modeled their build and deployment pipelines. With that, I want to switch gears. I want to move from talking about the question of what are we working on to the second question of what can go wrong. And again, these are in the framework with what are we going to do about it and did we do a good job? I'm mostly skipping those two questions for this talk. So what I want to talk about today is supply chain. I want to talk about Stride. I'm going to skip over machine learning and operations to talk about conflict because I think it's very interesting for today's world. And so let's start with supply chain. Last year, the president of the United States got into a fight with TikTok. A lot of that seemed to relate to the fact that TikTok is a Chinese company picking up data from its customers, and there was concern about that data. This is a global audience, I understand, and when I look at what TikTok was doing, it doesn't seem all that different from what a lot of American app companies are doing, Google, Facebook. And so when we start to say it's unacceptable for a foreign company to be collecting that data, that sounds like a complex trade policy question to me. And it raises questions about the supply chain. What happens if your supply chain is disrupted by international politics? How do you manage that possibility? Obviously, we had the problems with SolarWinds and how they produce software. The other thing that's happening at a supply chain level, I'm working fairly closely with the Food and Drug Administration on the question of how do we threat model medical devices before they make it to the market. And so I think we're going to see more regulatory work, more regulatory demands on how we think about the systems that we are building. And so you don't necessarily need threat modeling to think about each of these things, but it sure helps. So with that, let me turn my attention to Stride. Stride is a mnemonic. It stands for Spoofing, Tampering, Repudiation, Information Disclosure, Denial of Service, and Elevation of Privilege. I say it a lot. And it turned 21. It's one of the older frameworks in cybersecurity. And a lot of people say, oh, well, that's old and tired. I say it's battle-tested and proven. And I'm going to talk about the ways in which the details of some Stride threats are evolving, because I still use Stride as my primary go-to as I start to threat model a system. And so spoofing, there's a lot of changes in spoofing. We'll talk about packages, GPS, human authentication in terms of phones, in terms of markets for selfies, and audio-video spoofing. Package names. This was last month. This was sort of awesome. A fellow named Alex Bursan noticed that in different package management systems, they will treat public and private repositories in different orders. And so if you create a package that matches the name of an internal package and put it into a public repository, sometimes that package will get picked up in preference to the internally developed code. Oops. And this is spoofing. This is the name no longer resolves to the entity we thought it was. So nicely done, Alex. He made a lot of money on the bug bounties for that. And it's yet another variety of spoofing in your build pipeline. There is spoofing of GPS. We like to rely on GPS, but GPS is getting attacked. On Friday, there was an announcement from CISA here in the United States about a new network time and positioning library that they released to help people manage this in smart ways. Phone authentication is coming under attack a lot. US government regulators have deprecated it. Phone porting and SIM porting attacks are exceptionally popular in the cryptocurrency space, especially with cloud wallets. And there's an ongoing problem of people calling you and demanding that you authenticate yourself to them in various ways. And especially as we've come into the pandemic, where it's harder to just go into some place and show ID, these are on the rise. There's spoofing of facial recognition. There are markets for selfies because MasterCard announced pay with selfie. And so now dark web fulls contain selfies of people so that they can authenticate as this, what's the word I want, as this feature set was being built. There's audio spoofing. There are many startups doing what is called voice cloning. And voices are being used extensively as either formal authentication, right? Say your password and we're going to match your voice to it, or background authentication. When I call one of my banks, I no longer get asked for my password. They say, we just need to talk to you for another minute so the thing can get enough samples of your voice to check that it's you. And we've already seen business email compromise where, I'm a little, seen business email compromise where a faked version of a CEO's voice was used in a phishing scam. And I continue to expect that this will be integrated into things like Google Duplex that makes phone calls on your behalf. And we are just not ready for the way in which these attacks are going to scale over the next couple of years. There's spoofing of videos, and there's deep fake of videos. This is machine learning to attach a name or attach a fake video. Let me tell you, there's a lot of super disturbing examples out there. And I'm going to take a risk. I should have talked to Sam about this portion of it. We'll see if it works. But I have a work-safe example of this. Let's see if it plays well for you.
Many ways to spoof a person in email feel intuitive to people who've been on the internet for a while. Faking people on websites can be fun, but we tend to believe our eyes and ears, or their technological proxies, audio and video recording. There's an emerging field of technology called voice cloning. Companies are already using voice cloning to provide a consistent experience for customers who call their support lines. Imagine being able to bring grandparents to life in a teddy bear, or to not have to worry about the availability of a voiceover actor. There are lots of companies making voice cloning, and today, good voice analysis and reproduction can require an hour or more of source material. It's not just audio. Deepfake technology can be used to produce video of someone saying things they've never said. Voice cloning and deepfake.
So this was produced, by the way, and apologies that the audio level's going up and down. This is back to me at whatever level you were at. This was produced by my friends at LinkedIn Learning. And you saw my producer, Ray, who helps me put together LinkedIn Learning classes. And this is a faked version of me that they were able to do pretty quickly. So lots of new spoofing attacks. There's also interesting new tampering attacks. And a lot of these relate to IoT in various ways. So we have Airbnb attackers who can tamper with devices. And in today's world, they're in their Airbnbs for longer. And there's less people coming in to just check things out because of the pandemic. Things like cars are accessed not only by their owner, the person in the driver's seat, but by the spouses, by children, by mechanics. Lots of IoT things are exposed to new sets of attackers. And there are lots of parts to these attacks, right? We might see odometer rollback attacks. We might see attacks on the onboard computers in all sorts of interesting ways that we can predict and plan for if we use the tools of threat modeling to ask, what are we working on and what can go wrong? And what are we going to do about it? Repudiation. Repudiation is a little bit of an unusual word. It means to say that I'm not responsible for something. So think about, for example, there was no package left on my porch. Is that true? Was the package left on your porch and stolen by the delivery person or someone else? I don't want to be political, but I'm going to use some examples here and later on with some current events. There were a lot of repudiations in the 2020 United States presidential election. There were repudiations of people's ability to vote. There were repudiations of vote counts. There were repudiations of the results of the elections. And so what matters in these things is that we have some capability to figure out what's going on. And there was an entertaining little article about cops are playing copyrighted music so that when videos of them misbehaving are posted, the video will get taken down by copyright bots. I just thought that was a fascinating little evolution of how technology gets used by various parties to a conversation. Information disclosure. There's a number of fitness apps that, as it turns out, were being used to discover the location of secret military bases. There's the contact tracing issues where people are demonstrating an unwillingness to turn on contact tracing apps for privacy reasons. And there's lots and lots of other sensors out there. Entertaining, before we get to that, on the location bit, there have been attacks on things like corporate networks to get the location of drivers. And then over on the right here, this is a picture taken right outside an Amazon delivery service where there's a bunch of cell phones stuck in a tray so that drivers appear to be right at the Amazon distribution point and get given the next pickup slot to deliver packages. So people are gaming these location services for business purposes. Sensors are amazing. Phones are driving incredible improvements in the quality of sensors. They're driving the cost down. If you're making a thing, you now need to make sure you think about the information that's disclosed. And one I saw recently was a paper that actually takes advantage of how your shoulders move, and you can see my shoulders moving sort of subtly as I pretend to type here. Turns out that with machine learning, you can see what I was typing just there based only on the video. You don't even need the audio portion to make that work. These things exceed our intuition in all sorts of ways. I'm going to jump over denial of service. Mostly going to jump over elevation of privilege. There's a stream of new work about ways to break physical isolation imposed by processors. The thing I want to mention in elevation of privilege is the complexity of managing these things as there are attackers who are people's intimate partners, either present in their lives or pushed out. And it turns out that actually getting IoT devices to reset in ways that make sure the person who is physically in control of the device is electronically in control of the device turns out to be a difficult but tremendously important challenge that we need to engineer for last year, this year, and into the future. And so if you're making IoT, I strongly encourage you to think about these use cases and these abuse cases. Good. As I said, I'm going to skip over machine learning and kill chains. There's some resources in the slide deck that will be available to you. I want to talk about conflict, because what goes wrong is not just exploits. The threats that are happening today have impact beyond the technological. And a lot of people think about threat modeling helping you find threats to systems. But these threats also apply through systems. And I'm going to use some political examples again here, and I want to focus on what the example can teach us rather than the politics of the example. And I'm using these because they are evocative and I think thought-provoking. So, a couple of days ago, this gentleman, Vlad Tenev, the chief executive officer of Robinhood, was testifying before Congress, before the House Committee on Financial Services, because as it turns out, Redditors decided they wanted to buy GameStop stock, say that 3 times fast. And then there were problems and I actually didn't understand this. The problem was that Robinhood was on the hook to pay its trade provider, Citadel, based on share volume. And so Robinhood was asked to pay something like $1 billion that day to allow all that trading in GameStop to continue. And they had difficulty doing it. But the thing that we want to think about here is a forum on Reddit was used to drive massive trading in a stock, massive profits, massive losses on the other side of that in what's known as a short squeeze. And it was done via Robinhood, but there are plenty of places offering free or low-cost stock trading. The social drivers of the market are different. This is an interestingly new story, and we can ask, how might that apply to the things that we're doing here, wherever you work? So this gentleman is carrying the podium that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi normally uses, based on a set of a set of events that was organized online based on misinformation and disinformation that was spread online. And they showed up and took over the US Capitol and were about a minute away from the Vice President of the United States. What I want to talk about is not the politics of that situation. It's about how engagement algorithms push fake news, push disinformation, because it is engaging. The tools that we are building to communicate, the tools we are using to communicate, have a bias towards disinformation because it gets people riled up. And if you're riled up, you stay on the platform and they can learn more about you and show you more ads. Secondly, we have the question of these folks organized using a set of online platforms. Do these online platforms have some responsibility to be aware of and control what their platforms are used for without taking a political position and without being your lawyer? The answer is yes, you probably do have responsibilities to not turn a blind eye to such things. Another example of this, and this is getting more, I want to bring it over to the engineering side. This is a page from Yelp. It's about a business that recently made waves in the news. We don't take a position on this, blah, blah, whatever they have to say. This right here in front of you, this active cleanup alert, is a feature that Yelp built. And there are product design decisions that go into what's on this page. And you may be asked to design a page like this. You have to make design decisions, software decisions about how you do it. And so we can think about how we think about conflict as it reaches the product decisions that we're making. And the 4-question framework works for conflict. So what are we working on? It's a system with social aspects or user-generated conflict. What can go wrong is conflict as well as exploit. What are we going to do about it is we should catalog and study the way in which defenses work, because the intuitive defenses that we come to often fail or exacerbate the situation. For example, and I'm actually going to skip this. So for example, a common fix for trolling or for hate speech is that we will require real names. And it turns out that real name policies do not work. This is well known in the community which studies these things. But if you're not a member of that community, how do you find the resources to help you figure this out? It is unfortunately hard. Companies are learning how to do this. For example, Nextdoor is a private social network for your neighborhood. And they had a big problem with racial profiling in posts where people would report with the category of criminal activity, a Black person walking down their street. And so they did a bunch of A/B testing. They did product engineering on this to prompt people to say, can you give us more detail? Why do you think this is criminal? You're describing the person's skin color, but you're not describing any criminal activity. And so what they said is that these new forms have reduced posts containing racial profiling by 75%. And we can argue about if 75% is great. Maybe it's not sufficient. I don't want to get into that argument right now. What I want to say is that we can treat this problem the way we treat other product problems and address it as a problem that we choose to solve. And the conflict frame, the 4-question frame, can help us build better products that deliver better customer satisfaction if we have ways of finding these things. And so the fixes for these problems are less obvious. We need some expertise in human behavior. And I have been building out a catalog of design patterns at GitHub, open to pull requests, happy to collaborate with folks, because I believe that we can ask, what are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? And we can do better about conflict. With that, I told you we'd have 10 minutes for questions. Let me wrap quickly. Let me summarize threats by saying that the Stride instances evolve. Kill chains, which we didn't talk about, have emerged as a really useful threat modeling technique, and conflict is looming. Some key takeaways overall. The fundamental skills of threat modeling remain important. These are things that you should have in your engineering toolbox. The details, what we're working on, how we're working on it, and the threats themselves, these are changing and evolving, but they're not changing and evolving at a rate that means we can't work with them. Threat modeling helps us do a good job at managing them. Conflict is already here. It's coming. It's already here. We can engineer for it to build a better world. And so I strongly encourage you, if your platform, if your system, if your service involves user-generated conflict, you should be thinking about these problems. A couple of resources. As Simon mentioned, I have a book. I've got a bunch of videos. I blog a lot about threat modeling. And with that, I am happy to take questions which you have, either here live today or via email or via the Slack channel. And so, thank you. Thank you for your time and attention. What else can we talk about here?
Well, it's a really very interesting session, and thank you very much, Adam. We have a couple of questions coming up. So first question in from Nath here. Considering that threat modeling is never done, are there any thoughts on how long a threat modeling of a sprint should take, or rather should not take?
So let me start with the first half of your question, which is, if you're never done, you're never going to get started, right? So you need to time box it. And for a sprint, I like to time box it at 5 minutes. So we, Simon might say, hey, the new feature I'm working on is a way to take questions in the conversation. And so we've got some data coming in from these untrusted users, and we're going to filter it like this. And we're going to spend no more than 5 minutes talking about what can go wrong. And hey, maybe at the end of 5 minutes, you're still going strong, in which case you give it a little more time. Or you've spent a couple of minutes, you've explored some possibilities, you haven't found anything, you move on from it. So really doing it quickly is high value in your agile activity. And maybe you're never done. I'm never done threat modeling, believe me. But you have to give it a time slot that works for the team that surrounds you.
And for that 5 minutes, then, when we're talking about kind of like agile sprints, are you thinking 5 minutes at the end of the sprint, 5 minutes per feature? And when we think about features, in the more kind of like continuous delivery mode, whereby we're pushing bug fixes, security fixes, when do we consider a feature to be not a feature and actually a bigger bug fix, for example?
So I like to start at the start, right? As you're doing sprint planning, as you're doing backlog grooming, one of the questions that you should ask is, has anyone thought about security for this use case? Has anyone thought about security for this improvement? Right? And that can be as simple as asking what can go wrong, or it can be a little bit more in depth where someone says, I considered each of the 6 Stride threats quickly with regards to this feature, and I didn't come up with anything. Right? Once they've written that sentence, you're way ahead of never having threat modeled.
Awesome. Couple more questions coming in. So Gareth asks, what are your thoughts on high-level threat models, in particular, a particular business area, a la your GameStop example, which is unique perhaps to that business model?
So this is an opportunity to connect your threat modeling to the business. There is what we might call unavoidable threats, right? If you're doing user-generated content, excuse me, you're going to have some degree of conflict which takes place. The technological details don't matter. And so you can think about those and have a conversation with your executives about what are the unavoidable threats and what are the level to which we should be managing them in a consistent way across the whole of the product, rather than having the feature that I work on super duper secure, the feature that Simon works on, he doesn't bother thinking about it at all. The overall result is my work was not well spent. So that consistency, the inherent threats are important to think about.
Awesome. Another question from Daniel this time. With concepts of security first or security by design, Ed says, obviously, you believe that threat modeling is a life cycle, as you said, doing it all the time. Do you agree that regarding life cycle, that it's throughout the product life cycle?
Yes. So I like to threat model early when there's still design changes that we can make. And there we want to go breadth first. We want to think about things even shallowly is okay. Making sure we cover all the breadth, not putting a Medico lock on the front door when the windows don't even close. But then when I'm working on that window, I want to go depth first. I want to think about all of the things that can go wrong relative to the feature that I'm working on in a lot more depth. And so we can integrate this thinking at different points, and always the linchpin is the question, what are we working on, right? I'm working on the overall product design. Think about that. I'm working on the feature. Think about that.
Mm-hmm. And do you see this ever something that developers will think about and have that kind of like 5-minute discussion with other developers? Or do you think this is something, sorry, my dog seems to want attention. Or do you see this as something?
Oh, who's a good doggy? Who's a good doggy? Yes.
Today. She's one today and she loves the, you love YouTube. There we go.
So will developers think about this?
Yeah,
I think developers
without that interaction with the security team, do you think the development teams will ever adopt threat modeling as part of similar security testing that they would tend to do in their pipeline today?
The question is, what can go wrong? You can't walk down the street without thinking about what can go wrong, right? You can't, especially today, you can't go outside without thinking about what can go wrong. Developers can absolutely think about things at that level. There's specific threats. There's tricky areas where we as security folks should be available to support, to help, to provide libraries that solve common problems. But if your developers aren't thinking about what can go wrong in their code at all, you have a problem right now. Let's ask them to think about security. Let's support them. Let's train them. Let's educate them so that they can get more and more mature about how they do this. But yeah, they should be thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of organizations have kind of like code review checklists, right? And there's no reason why this kind of thing couldn't be a part of that. Ed Daniel asks a follow up: who are the right champions? Is it everyone, product manager, customer? Who would you say the champion of this kind of a process would be?
It's a great question, and my answer is really who champions it. in your organization, right? There are organizations that I work with as a consultant that have super strong program management cultures where the program managers can pick up a keyboard and write code, but they prefer to think about something else. There's others I work with where the project managers can barely run a schedule, never mind think about the technology. So who drives it? And I'm blank. Abe has a post on OKRs, and I've got a follow-up post on my blog on this right now about threat modeling is not a single deliverable. It's the developers can talk about what are we working on and make sure that's clearly communicated. Somebody else can make sure they go ahead and answer the question, what can go wrong? Don't think about it as a single deliverable. Think about it as a set of deliverables that many people can be involved in as a way of communicating across the organization.
That's awesome. Adam, we're pretty much at time, so I'll say a big thank you to your expertise and for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure hosting you here.
You're welcome. And I just, if you want to share the, since I was just talking about a very specific blog post, I shared that to you in our chat. Thank you to everyone who stuck around. And I will be hopping on the Slack later today to pick up any other questions you have. Shoot me email. You know, I love this stuff. I'm always happy to talk to people about how to make it work. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. And I've just shared that in the Slack as well, but it'd be great to have you there as well. Thank you very much, Adam. And on our next, well, not our next session actually, but there's a DevSecCon Germany chapter launching, and we have a live stream session on the 19th of March. So please do join us for that. That's at 12 p.m. CEST. And we have two sessions there, one which is going to be around how to achieve strong authentication. And then there's a second session there about how you can find vulnerabilities in cloud native applications. And that's from Tobias Urban and Matthias Conrad. So please do check that out. And that's available at devseccon.com. You can see that in the events section. So feel free to go there and register for that event for free. But it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Adam. And of course, you can see Adam's details there as well if you wanted to reach out. Absolutely. Thanks, Adam, and thanks for supporting DevSecCon. Appreciate it. See you all soon and have a great rest of your